So in line with the World Mental Health Day 2016, the brief was Dignity in Mental Health, Psychological and Mental Health First Aid for All. So we're offering 2 recordings on the subject of psychological first aid. And I'm going to be talking with my colleague about what it means to become a psychological first aider. The aim of the recording is to teach and enable you to provide compassion, basic care, comfort and support to people who are experiencing distress. However, remember, psychological first aid is not just for other people. You can learn to put the ideas in place for yourself and begin taking care of your own emotional needs. If you're ready, we'll begin by defining psychological first aid. Clive, can I begin this session by asking, how would you define psychological first aid? Is it something about being able to identify and respond to another person when they are distressed?
Oh yes, you're right. It's about offering people help because they're stressed and reacting in a specific way to that person. But it's important to remember that psychological first aid is help right in the moment, at the time it's needed. Immediate, there and then responses and reactions.
But why is it so important for people to know about psychological first aid and how to provide it?
Well, offering this type of immediate help is no different at a basic level than offering physical assistance to someone who, say, fainted or requires resuscitating. Either way, that person requires first-hand help, whether that be physical help, psychological help, or both. Not that long ago, there was a rush for the general public to know how to offer cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and that was really well advertised. I think it was Vinny on the television, a hard man. And that was really well advertised, wasn't it, by the British Heart Foundation, I think. This is no different and would benefit from more advertising because it may go some way to reduce the fear and stigma that's still around when it comes to talking about mental health.
Okay, that makes sense. I understand what you mean now. But there still seems to be lots of confusion and a lack of education with regards to psychological issues. So I'd say it's about doing what's needed in the moment, using a specific set of skills to either help the people or the certain person in distress, or if it's me, to use the skills on myself. Is that right?
Yeah, but in addition, you'd want to create a compassionate environment to assess what that person might need at that particular time, provide immediate support, and help other people cope in the face of stressful events. And again, you can adjust what I've said to suit your own needs if you're looking after yourself. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. But as a member of the general public, how would I recognise someone who might be in distress? Or for that matter, how can I recognise a build-up of stress in myself?
That's a good question. It's really important and often overlooked, and it's important to take into account a whole range of different things. Take a minute. What do you think you might be aware of, rather than me give you the answer? What might be happening?
Well, I suppose I would be really worried. If I was really worried about something, then I'd probably be quite verbal and expressing my thoughts, maybe through anger, tears, general upset, screaming or shouting. All sorts of things might be going on. I suppose I would notice my heart beating faster. I might not be breathing as well as I could. And my overall behaviours could change. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. And to help teach the basics of psychological first aid, I'm going to pick apart some of the points that you raise, and I'm going to start with stress reaction, which of course can vary from person to person. It's important to remember we're all individual, so stress can appear, disappear, remain the same, get worse, get better. There's lots of different ways stress can present itself. So one person might manage it well, another might not do so well. But in any event, it's the body responding or reacting to certain situations. It isn't an illness, even though it can feel very frightening and stressful at the time.
So the severity and duration of stress depends on how well people manage and cope with the situation they are placed in.
Absolutely. So the psychological first aider will have to be well equipped in recognising the stress and managing the variables as they arise.
So it isn't just a case of giving lots of theirs and oodles of sympathy.
No, of course it isn't. It's much more involved than that, isn't it? Let's think about the possible reactions to a stressful situation and concentrate just on the feelings an individual might experience. So feelings could include rage, anger, irritability, resentment, anxiety, fear, sadness, desolation, hopelessness, terror, guilt, depression, numbness, dissociation, disinterest. And as much as some people become emotional, likewise they can become really unemotional. The list could go on, but the examples I've given to you provide some idea of the complexity of feelings which can be associated with stressful situations.
Well, if you've got feelings like that, what about the thoughts? I guess there are 100 or more variables on those as well.
Oh, goodness me, yes. Thousands of thoughts, I would imagine. Again, this will vary from person to person, but here's a few examples. A distressed person might describe poor concentration and the inability to think clearly. Maybe their memory is impaired. A person might not be able to make a decision. They might become confused and forgetful. Their sense of time or reality might be distorted. They may need sort of reassuring or believing that they haven't asked you for something when they have asked you for something, so they're getting confused there. They may be asking you over and over, time and time again, and not realising they've asked you, which can happen, say, with dementia. Can you think of any thoughts where a person might have in a stressful situation, or think about yourself when you've been stressed? What thoughts might you have had?
Well, for me, I suppose I'd be thinking that I can't cope, or it's all going to go terribly wrong, that I'll be thinking that other people are going to be thinking that I'm stupid. Lots of things will be racing through my mind. I also think that ongoing stress can decrease self-worth and confidence. Also, an individual may experience intrusive thoughts, maybe flashbacks to a particular incident, or maybe they might even think about self-harm or engage in it. They also might think that they're to blame and therefore believe that they're guilty, which might add to the stress. You know, now we're starting to talk about it, I realise just how complex the situation could be, and I also understand the importance of learning skills to help become an effective psychological first aider. It isn't just about having a conversation after all, is it?
No, it isn't, and you've raised some really good points. And of course, now we're going to explore the physical effects that stress can have, and these could include fatigue, difficulty in sleeping, agitation, physical complaints, things like headaches, stomach problems, a decreased or increased appetite, decreased or increased sex drive. A person might become easily startled, hypervigilant, looking around for danger all the time, or they might have an increased craving for things like caffeine or nicotine, sweet things with sugar in, illicit drugs, alcohol, legal highs. They might feel weak, they might be lightheaded, nauseous.
Wow, that's just a lot of information there. I'm not sure I'll be able to get all that stuff in one go, particularly if I'm experiencing such a stressful situation.
No, I hope you're not getting one of those things yourself, absolutely. I've just read out a whole range of symptoms, though, you could experience. Not you get them all at once, necessarily. And it's useful just to be aware of the range of symptoms if you want to become a psychological first aider. Think about broadening your knowledge base rather than having to remember them all.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've explored possible thoughts and feelings in relation to stress, including physical reactions. But what about behaviours? How could that be different?
Well, people might start crying more. There might be more angry outbursts. People might start avoiding people, places, or certain situations. A person might become more disagreeable or might become argumentative. They might develop problems at work or school, depending on how old the person is. They may engage in risky behaviours.
So what do you mean by risky behaviours?
Well, for example, driving dangerously without paying attention, maybe they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, engaging in unsafe sex or having multiple partners. Behaviours for which that person are abnormal might be one way of thinking about it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that makes sense. So what about not looking after personal hygiene or attending to your own physical health needs? Like not taking required medication or something similar?
Absolutely. All of these changes in behaviour may go a long way to indicate that something's wrong. But of course, you could just be walking along the street and notice someone in distress, so you won't be privy to the prior knowledge, and you'll be relying on your communication skills to help that distressed person.
Right, so it's important to check things out with a distressed person because there's lots of clues available to us just in behaviour. I'd like to move on to the spiritual side of things, if I may. I know that often this can be quite tricky because spirituality can be confused with religion, when in fact it's different and very important to take into account at times of distress. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree, and there's evidence to support that spirituality needs to be taken into account during times of distress, if it fits for that person. So for example, at times of distress, a person may have a change in their relationship with their beliefs, so maybe about God or a higher power. They might start expressing things like, if there was a God, why has he let this happen? Or, there definitely is no God now. You've probably heard people say it at times of upset. Well, at least something similar.
Yes, I have. And people might actually abandon their own rituals, prayers, devotions, sacraments, meditations and so on, because now there's no point to it.
There may be questions about faith, rejections towards spiritual care providers, struggles with questions that can't be answered, puzzlement about the meaning of life, fairness, justice, the afterlife, nature, the universe and the bigger picture.
There could be a loss of faith, and may, in some circumstances, a gaining of spirituality, a closeness to something that cannot be described, or a yearning for something that is not there, a belief that something spiritual has happened. There's so much to take in and think about. It isn't just going to be up to somebody who is in distress and offering them a bit of support, is it?
No, it isn't. And you're going to be an effective... Really, there's quite a lot to learn, isn't there, if you're going to be effective. But, you know, much of it you probably do every day already, and it just hasn't really been pointed out in this kind of format before, so you probably already do a lot of this.
Thank goodness for that. I was starting to think that I can't take all of this in. Anyway, can we move on?
Yes, let's do so.
Okay, so in the next recording, I hope you're going to join me and Clive in discussing contributing factors to a stress response. And that will be the second and final recording for teaching psychological first aid.
Thank you. I'd love to join you on that one. Well, that's it from us, and until next time.